the evolving legal landscape, such as the e-commerce laws, the consumer protection, the information security, the data privacy governance, all of that would be covered. And of course, the need for speed building, the legal expertise, the government incentives, ease of doing business, everything, I guess, these are going to be the touch points for this particular session. So without any ado, of course, I am all set to invite our session moderator, the session chairperson, Tejal Patil, the senior legal advisor, OYO. And as Tejal, of course, joins us right there on the screen, smiling, I'm not sure with a cup of chai or not, or coffee, whatever is poison, but for sure, thank you, Tejal, for again those happy vibes. It's a Saturday evening, and allow me to tell to my audience that you have been managing regulatory, contractual, and legal compliance for the company, steering really OYO's strategic initiatives, dispute resolution, providing actionable counsel on strategic business decisions, along with operational execution. So, Tejal, you are a qualified solicitor at both the Bombay Incorporated Law Society and the Law Society of England and Wales, a certified Six Sigma Green Belt. Happy to be hosting you, Tejal. With that, please allow me to and join me in also welcoming your panelists. Let's welcome Neera Sharma, who has been waiting backstage to take up the spotlight right there. Neera is CEO, CLO Systema Sham Teleservices, proficient in steering bottom line profitability by ensuring optimal utilization of available resources. Something like handling crisis situations is something that comes to Neera very naturally and successfully, I would say. Skilled in corporate law, legal compliance, complaint management, so on and so forth. She is the one who successfully handled the startup phase of many organizations. So, of course, Neera, it will be very worthwhile to be listening your perspectives. With that, I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, you can see right up there on the screen, we also have Geetika Singh, the AVP Legal Pine Labs. And Geetika, for you, it's been 15 years of experience as an in-house counsel, and of course, across industries. You started your career with GE, and since then you've been advising on matters concerning financial services, technology, aviation, renewable energy, etc., etc. I always have to add that etc. because there's so much that you all have done indeed. And Geetika, you've been also involved in the regulatory advisory, engaging with various regulators, of course, like RBI, NHB, Customs, etc. Thank you for joining us. And with that, we also have with us Anu Tiwari, the partner from Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. Anu, you represent Indian and multinational fintech emerging technology companies. And this is on transactional enforcement and regulatory matters and more. And you advise financial services clients on matters before RBI, SEBI, Ministry of Finance, Supreme Court of India. And you're prompt, you're knowledgeable. That's what we got to know. And with that, also welcoming Tushar Maharishi, technology lawyer, thought partner and emerging leader. What do I say about Tushar? 14 years of legal experience, and Tushar is one of the youngest lawyers, to be in the country counsel position at Airbnb, and he puts in multiple legal compliance processes in place, including but not limited to more robust process on cases pertaining to also sexual harassment in the workplace and a more robust labor compliance process amongst others. Before handing it over to our diligent moderator, would want to duly thank Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas for being our session sponsor. And Tejal, with that, it's over to you.
Thanks, Shikha. I think we've come also on the end of a very, very interesting discussion. So, very glad to be here with this great panel. So let me just give a little background, and I'm sure you all have heard it in the course of the day, but I was pretty shocked when I saw the numbers that the government has recognized over like 41,000 startups as of December of last year. And that's not even counting sort of this year, according to the economic survey. The other interesting piece is that most of these startups are generating jobs. So this is an area of great focus for us as a country. where employment is one of the biggest issues that faces, a population of our size. And India is really the third largest startup ecosystem. There were 53 firms being valued at over 1 billion last year, which we all know are unicorns. And this was in 2020. In 2020, we had 12 such unicorns. And we know in 2020, we were in the middle of COVID. And we still had, these brave young entrepreneurs coming out and starting new things and really scaling up their organizations last year. This year, the growth has been even more phenomenal. There have been 3 unicorns added every month of 2021. So if we really look at this world of startups and, the panel before and other panels of the day talking about how technology is playing such a big role, this number can only grow, and it will grow exponentially. So like Tanu said in the earlier panel that, these topics require an entire day in each of them themselves. But what we'll do is we'll just start with a few fun conversations and then go, dive into all of the legal developments in this area. So, about 10 years ago, we just about had the large corporate groups in India who were bolstering their in-house legal departments. Otherwise, it wasn't really heard of to have a lot of in-house counsels. There were a few multinationals who had in-house counsels, coming in from their Europe and US backgrounds. In Indian companies, you had, the company secretaries, somebody reporting to the CFO. It's a very different world. They started hiring. But what we're seeing now is startups are hiring a lot of in-house counsels early in their journey. So with that, I just want to start with Gitika, just saying that, look, after a stint in GE and GMR and L&T, why did you join a startup? I mean, what made you sort of take that step?
Thanks, Tejal. I think, definitely taking this big leap of faith in joining a sort of a startup after all the, the other bigger entities that I've been on needed some evaluation at my end. So I know startups and established companies both have merits and disadvantages to them. But I think one very important factor that led me to join a startup was like, the big field that a startup has, and there's a lot more play. There are challenges and exposures that we get a lot in startups vis-a-vis in established concern. So I think that was something, a big driver for me. Entities or concerns that have been set up usually have, very, very process-oriented legal teams, and there are subject matter experts within a legal team as well. So you would have a competition law expert or an M&A, real estate, etc. But with a startup, owing to budgetary constraints, we have smaller legal teams, and everything goes to them. So you get a lot of exposure. You can lead bigger deals, and be the Spock, and there's lots more to learn. So I think that played a very important role. I think for young lawyers, it's very beneficial to be part of a startup. You get a lot of more exposure, a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of more stuff to learn. So I think that was one reason why I took this leap of faith and joined a startup.
That's great. You're a risk taker. So, there's also a kind of fungibility that comes with these startups. So I really want to ask Neera, because her profile goes right from CLO to CEO. So it's really interesting to figure out, Neera, your journey and your career journey as to how this happens. And is this really the startup environment that's enabling it?
Yeah, thanks, Tejal. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is the startup environment. Like, this journey has been a roller coaster ride and prospect to be exhilarating. And my success mantra always been like no compromises with ambitions, though it is intractable but not impassable. So evolving from the roots is always full of challenges, as it is like constructing your dream house with exceedingly constrained resources, I can say. And when you join a startup, like there are a lot of responsibility, and you are accountable for a lot of things. And like I have worked in many startups, like I worked in MR, and then I worked in Aircel, and then finally I came to Systema when they have just came to India. So when I joined Systema, like I was the first legal counsel and the third employee in the organization. And that time I was looking after commercial, I was looking after technical part, I was looking after accounting, everything. Like, I don't think I have read that much in my law school as I read during my job, and different aspects I have learned thanks to the leadership team also that time. Like, they have given me that kind of exposure, and wherever I am stuck, I can just go and ask them the relevant or irrelevant questions. And then, like, once you overcome this, then comes your time to set rules and run the show, you know. And I have been the only woman leader to attain the C-suite in Systema. Like, I can say, because of my sharp focus, tenacious commercial acumen. I always been considered myself as a business lawyer, not a lawyer, and a firm grip on issues, leading with examples, and then remodeling the complexities, which stood as my pivotal strengths throughout my journey. And then comprehensive commercial knowledge, as I said, and profound perspective of business operations, ensuring accountability. Like, if I do something, I always believe that I am accountable for that. And I always been a go-to lawyer person in the organization. And in mostly we see that whenever some business team come with some idea, we always say that, okay, what is your risk appetite? Then we will give the advice to you. But in my case, because I was from the beginning in that organization, I know what is the risk appetite of my organization. And I always work there as my own work. And then it has just further strengthened my vision for assimilation of bigger picture. And being a lawyer, like, I have dealt with numerous legal risks and subsequent protection for the organizations I have served, without compounding the business essence, I can say, and invaluable deals. So while keeping the abreast of development across all the sectors, so then I can say that the wheels of fortune have elevated me to CEO from a legal executive. And breaking barriers and then doing my self-evaluation are my pronounced takeaways for achieving this, whatever the position I have achieved. And while as the general counsel, I have been like promoted on the board also. Like, I've been working on the board before I become the CEO for the good 4-5 years. And during that, I have seen like how the boardrooms have worked. And like that time, I was too young for that position to hold. And there were a lot of questions. And whenever, if you are in a board as a lawyer, then all the independent directors, you know, like everybody will be questioning to you instead of the rest of the board. Then you become the more accountable and more responsible to that extent, I can say. So that has been my journey till now. So
Neera, it's totally a role model, right? It's just opening up a whole new world for lawyers. You know, we've obviously seen them in Parliament and elsewhere, but to see them, you know, as CEOs and running corporations, I think it's a great journey, and it adds to Geetika's point of, you know, just opening up opportunities and giving a whole different play for people who, you know, who want to start with these startups. So, you know, traditionally, I think, Anu, people would say, you know, startups really probably take in-house counsel to cut costs, right? They don't really have much money for legal, you know, issues, etc. They kind of bumble along the way in the beginning. Tell me, I think you mentioned at some point that there is a trend of startups using law firms, and not just law firms, but using tier 1 law firms, you know, rather than just looking at sort of costs. Why do you think this is happening, and what's really what the startups are looking for?
Tejal, that's a brilliant question. And before that, thank you so much for having me here, and a pleasure to meet everybody in the session, Neera, Geetika, Tushar. I think before I address it, people, just one statistical point here. Marriott versus Airbnb. Marriott probably was, I recall, was 90-plus-year-old franchise, bought Starwood, has 8,000 plus properties all over the world, valued 30 plus billion, 8,000 plus properties, owned, leased, on the books. Airbnb has nothing on the books, 100 plus billion. And I'm sure my good friend Tushar will vouch for it. He was single-handedly leading all the legal challenges in India, as opposed to, I'm aware, the big team on the legal side that, Starwood Marriott has had. So firstly, I think, what is a startup today? If you look at valuation itself is not very clear. Because there is an old economy and there's a new economy. If you look at valuations, simplicity, I know, it keeps fluctuating. I think just the whole complexity, and why this background is the whole complexity that probably a tech business faces. And when we talk about startup, I can't recall the last time we had a manufacturing startup. I mean, Boat probably is one example, which came up, or maybe, in telecom sector earlier with Micromax and, other phones. But broadly, when you talk about startup, you're talking about a platform, so to speak, right? A services platform. What has happened over the years is there was a time when Flipkarts of the world, when nobody knew what aggregation is. But over the years, because of course, India versus global issues, also retail issues in terms of domestic versus global. Just the issues, and I can tell you, Tejal, as me myself, I mean, to stay abreast of all the legal changes is becoming impossible when we as a large law firm have all the tools available. So at some level, whenever I've thought about moving on the other side, one big worry I've had is how will I know what the law is, and on not a lighter note but a serious note. So I think the one reason why, and I'm, we are seeing a lot of the early stage, especially second gen founders, because first gen is, you still want to build the business. It's too early. You want to scale up before you want to worry about losing something. I mean, gain first, then you lose. But a lot of the second gen founders, and I won't even talk about the Valley, SF, or the Beijing based ventures which are in India, have realized that law is now no longer law. Law is policy. It's quite like crystal ball gazing. I'm reminded of the movie 300 with the oracles. What really happens in the future, as a lawyer, you have to really know, because very often I realize the client knows the law far better than we do as lawyers. They will come and tell you this is the particular provision, but we know that, and very often we're like, oh, there's something like this also there. So it's really the world we're operating in right now is broken into three parts. Firstly, it's the IT laws, which I think we all know is a mix of OTT, it's a mix of data, it's a mix of intermediary, it's a mix of what all. Second, it's a mix of e-com. Many people will be surprised to know that consumer protection law, which so far we thought was, only when you find a snail in a jar of Coke that kicks in. I mean, the famous, Tushar can vouch for me on this, the Donahue versus Stevenson, which is the legacy, what consumer law basically means. But now e-com is covered, services side e-com. FDI policy is becoming far more complex in terms of, the whole price influence. I mean, followed of the Walmart, Flipkart, 2018 amendments. Nodal officer, compliance officer we've talked about earlier. So why it is becoming far more critical is, one, how law is evolving is in a flux, and it's not new. If you look at most Asian countries, and one thing I do at a personal level is, if you look at economists, and I personally try and follow Europe, because something I've realized after 6 months, the same happens in India. You look at GDPR, you look at data laws, you look at all the entire tech lash, as it is called. And the last piece is, which is why it's critical for new age founders to really, and why more and more lawyers now actually, to our detriment, are not picking law firms, but want to go into, besides the whole ESOP upside, is that you get to see the future. You have to be able to actually not talk about the present, because that everybody can really figure out, but directionally, where is it headed? Because, you are only, and now the dotted line is no longer to the CFO. If you recall earlier, I mean, who the lawyers reported to, nobody knew, but broadly the CFO, it was a cost center. But now the dotted line increasingly, like it is in the West, is to the CEO. So, you can get called by the founder and be asked, what is the regulator thinking? And you cannot say, I don't know. So the point I'm making is it is increasingly going towards how it ought to be, which is a very Western world, where an internal general counsel of a tech company is not just contract or leave and license or the routine stuff, but quite clearly, I mean, I'll give you an example. If you look at Airbnb general counsel or Uber general counsel, right? They were the consigliaries, like the Godfather, the movie. They were the ones who were the ones who were most important and most relied upon by the likes of Brian Chesky or Travis Kalanick. So it is a very different role, and increasingly I'm seeing a lot of my peers, seniors who work in Indian tech ecosystem performing a similar role. I know a bit of a longish monologue, but let me pause there if it kind of answers the question.
No, I'm glad there is a penny wise pound, it's not a penny wise pound foolish approach. Sorry, Neera, you were saying.
I just want to add something what Anu said. So I will say that for any startup founder, it is the finding a good general and not say general counsel, any counsel in house or outsourced is as good as finding a co-founder. So I will say that finding a good counsel they are as serious because if it is like he's abreast with the business and he is very aggressive, he will first day what he will find is a good counsel, so who can see the future and who can, like, if you set your house right at the first day, it will remain as it is for the future also. So that is what I want to add to what Anu has said.
Totally. So it's a real partnership role here. So let me take that a little bit to Tushar, right? So an international company starting in India, you've been in a couple of the largest. What is it? The first thing they do is let's put a lawyer in there. What's the thought process? What is the global perspective on how India is viewing startups?
Hey, Tejal, thanks. And just a big hello to everybody and thanks for having me. So yeah, I think, you're right. And just to echo what some of the other people have said, I think the perspective is that yes, one of the most important people to bring into the room or to have really early on and who has a seat at the table is the legal counsel. I think both at Google and at Airbnb, I've learned that the legal function is really central to any decision which is made and is very, very sort of important, right? So like Anu said, that it's pretty much, day in, day out, you have visibility, you're talking to senior management, and really what you say carries a lot of weight, right? And which is the idea that when you're starting up in the country, you need to understand the laws, you need to understand what it's going to be like to be in the country. And who better than a good legal counsel to tell you that? So definitely that's the perspective. The other thing I can tell you is that I think generally the perception American companies have is that, because there's a lot written in the media and.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I think I went on mute. I said sometimes the perception is that, but I think that perception is definitely changing. And I think the whole ease of doing business, the fact India is investment friendly, that you should come here and set up shop is definitely sort of finding an audience and finding confidence. So that I can share as well.
That's great. So tell me, with so much demand that we're now saying that, okay, all these startups need lawyers. Is there really a different type of legal expertise required to work in this environment? Because I know my law school definitely didn't teach me anything about this world. Can anyone teach you what it should be? Because I think the earlier panel also spoke about, like laws that have not even yet been written. So let alone sort of, teaching anyone about it. Go ahead, Tushar.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. I definitely think that you do require a different skill set. You are slightly away from, in that sense, being a traditional lawyer. There is this requirement to think out of the box and to marry sort of the law and the business ask, right? So I think how you look at risk, how you weigh risk, how you look at risk management, how you look at leadership decisions, what's at stake. I think all that comes into play, right? And I think the buzzword in American companies is stakeholder management. And I think because you have a seat at the table as counsel, you are expected to manage different stakeholders. And you can only do that when you understand the company, understand the business it's doing, its ambitions, and understand the risk it's willing to undertake. So I think it's very different from, if you were at a pure play sort of legal role, or you were a litigating counsel where you're fighting a certain issue. Like here, you really need to sort of think for the company, understand the business. It's not enough to just understand the law. And I think Anu will agree with me here, because I have come down very heavily on him when I've sought advice from him and his firm, that I can't help but say that please contextualize your advice, right? Because I think it's so important to constantly sort of understand the law in the context of what the company is doing, as opposed to just saying, okay, here's the law black and white. So I think those are some of the skill sets which are required.
So how do you sort of, let me take that to Anu. Let's look at it the other way around. How do you look at your observations, on dealing with clients from startups versus dealing with clients from the more traditional companies? Are they different? Are they more demanding?
So, Tejal, being in our industry, every client is demanding, is what I've realized. The ones who aren't demanding are like glorious clients, and particularly I take great attention to them who only work from Monday to Friday. But there are three things, at least particularly I've learned whenever it's early stage. And again, at the cost of saying what is early stage, the lines are getting very blurred anymore, because when you see a Warburg or a Blackstone or a Temasek investing in early stage in India, which are pure play marquee Ps, you don't know what is startup and what is not startup. But first thing I've learned is, you have got to actually completely put your skin aside. You have to start afresh when you deal with startup, and you've got to wear the hat depending on you advising the investor or the target, because both are different roles completely. I mean, what I focus on, firstly, business model. Business models are extremely complicated now. Business model has to be legal, FDA compliant. There are various issues. I mean, without getting into names, given the whole innovation that's happening. So first thing is business model. It can't turn out that it was quote unquote illegal, very black and white, not gray. Second thing, at least personally, what I've learned is if it's a regulated space, so say RBI, SEBI, telecom, when you have a regulatory license, which is the bedrock of your business, not being a cowboy with the regulator, because the regulator is very different and you're very different. Regulators are 50, 60 from an age bracket standpoint who look at you, and you are, and it's not about age, it's about, maturity of the ecosystem. So how do you, deal with the whole not being a cowboy? And lastly, one thing I personally have learned is how to ensure there's nothing which happens which puts the risk of somebody going to jail. Because there are so many laws in India where you just don't know where imprisonment comes in. I mean, if you were to ask me, strategic listed deal, private equity, the usual, right? It would be contract. It would actually be 100 rupee fine also might matter under company law. It would be a very different consideration. But to my mind, it's a very go-no-go approach. You work with an early stage. What you pick out is don't do it. You don't pick out, things like where a risk, quote unquote, can't be ruled out, which is a very favorite lawyer qualification that you see in opinions. So it's something personally I've learned, because business has to move on. You cannot approach a Wall Street bank with your advice compared to even a Decacon in India. Forget a unicorn.
So fair enough, but how does, and then this is the question to Neera, because she's now in this unique position, how do you then manage the expectations from the founders? People who want to run really fast, and you gave examples about sort of how long it took Marriott versus an Airbnb versus anyone else. These companies are not, are in a hurry. So how do you really manage that expectation of the founders versus, as Anu says, the business model works or not, the laws are not clear. So how do you look at that?
Tejal, like mostly what happens is there is always founders' expectations, whatever their expectations, we should have completed yesterday. So we take it from there and then start working on that on a fast pace. And for that kind of work, whenever I see that what kind of team I want to be, I want somebody who has a very strong common sense. Maybe he doesn't know law, but he needs to have a very strong common sense, a good business acumen. And at the same time, like we always, whenever we speak to the founder or the investor, like we always says, okay, this is your big picture. We work on that. We are working on that. Tell me what is your plan B? So if it fails, if this structure doesn't work, if there is nothing happens after we worked hard for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, what is the plan B? What is your, so meanwhile they start working on plan B, so we complete that work. That is
so
that
always have a fallback.
Yeah, fallback. Right? So if you want to take this kind of a risk, this much time spent, and plan B has to be related to plan A. So that whatever the work we have done on plan A, at least 50% of that we should utilize for the plan B also. So that has always been our advice to them. So it has to be there, always been a follow point. It is not only like it's a very big idea. We don't know whether it will work or not, whether we'll get a regulatory approval or not, whether we are working, whether the policy will change overnight. So we don't know that. Nobody has those answers. So there has to be always a plan B, follow-up option, and follow-up option has to be something related to plan A only, so that half of the work which you have done in the market from the legal point and from the other aspects, at least those can be utilized.
I would just like to say that, I think, and this is just based on my 15 years of experience, that I think sound legal advice from an in-house counsel is when you're not saying a no, you're saying a yes, maybe, right? And you're saying, here are your options, here are the risk attached with these are the options. And now let's, as a collective group, pick one of those options, right? And I think if you are there, that's when you win the confidence of your CFO or CEO, right? Because I think that's the kind of person they're looking to hire, right? That we quantify risk against each of the options and we present all the options saying, here's the best case scenario. And here's what you can do if this one doesn't work, and you quantify that. And then that just gets easier for a CEO to then take a decision saying, okay, this is what the impact looks like if I decide this way. And I think that's where the sort of in-house counsel landscape in terms of just expectation is headed.
Yeah,
except that you can't have a week, right? You can't have a week to do it. You have about 30 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You need to start with yes. You need to start with yes. That is the mantra.
You start with yes. Yeah. Perfect. So let's then jump into really, Geetika, what areas, in your sort of in the fintech world a bit. So what areas do you think are the biggest challenges faced by startups in India today? Which laws, which regulations are the ones that you feel, either need to disappear or catch up?
Sure. Yeah, Tejal. So I think payments and the fintech industry is very evolving, and every day there's something new to conquer. Our regulator also is kind of learning with us because there's lots more happening. The field is technical and regulations have not been so advanced till now. So as in-house counsels or as counsels of the legal challenges that we face in startups, and especially on the fintech is the constantly evolving regulatory landscape. And one thing that we've encountered of late is the recent regulation, which requires all card credentials not to be stored by the payment service providers. So that is something that's come as a huge, huge kind of a shock or something to deal with for all of us in the payments industry. And the regulators be kind of good to give us options, and you explore options or other technical bits and pieces that you can fit in, tokenization, etc. But I think from a startup's perspective, all of this sometimes becomes a challenge because there's a cost, there's an infrastructure, a certain amount of technical expertise, relying on networks and banks, which might not be, you're not that exposed. Bank networks might not be aware, or they might not be aware of the security robustness that you have. So I think in the payment sector, this is something that's a challenge these days that we have, and there's a regulation constant change that we need to kind of tackle with. So those are a couple of the problem areas. Yeah.
Tushar, what did you face in sort of the industries you were in?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest sort of concern area is the data protection law, which has been in the works. Also, the labor law issues which crop up, especially when it comes to just small time issues around provident fund or gratuity or stuff like that. The e-commerce rules which came out, which spoke about grievance redressal, left the company sort of scrambling to appoint officers based in India. Also brought in the whole aspect of product liability and how our policies need to be clearer. So I think, the e-commerce rules, the labor law codes, the data protection laws, the intermediary rules, all of them, right? I think they were all top of mind. They still are for all these companies who are platforms and sort of trying to figure out that where do they stand today. And I think the gestation period in India is very right. So I think you're trying to understand and then or we'll publish rules in
Tushar, your internet is freezing up a little bit.
I think that I'm so sorry. Let me blank high, and
Yeah,
for
that's
sometimes
fine.
the unknowns are a lot. Yeah.
Just like what we're facing right now. Tushar, we'll come back to you. I think, Anu, so what are the areas that startups come to you for? Tushar, we'll come back as soon as you get yours fixed. Anu, do you want to sort of take the question? Anu, you're on mute.
Sorry, Tejal, I think I had a bit of a blackout. Missed the question.
No, I just said that. So what are the areas that startups come to you for?
So business model proofing is one big area. FDI assessment, which is linked to it. Flipping, just given the whole debt problem and the whole flipping of structures connected with that round tripping problems, because Indian regulators, especially enforcement directorate, have become very, very, they're watching the whole flipping issue, especially where the source pool of capital is directly Indian, goes outside and Indian money, holdco, opco in India. They have then come for a lot of the point, for example, that Geetika mentioned. Though I must say this whole card storage has been a payment aggregator problem, which has been there for a while. So whenever these new fintech regulations come, there is always chaos. In fact, we owe a lot of our livelihood to RBI because they keep it quite on steroids during the pandemic, especially in payments, so to speak. Not much on SPACs. There was a bit of a initial euphoria. They've been coming to us, actually, interestingly, a lot of domestic M&A, because still 2 to 3 years ago, you wouldn't imagine Indian startups doing much of domestic M&A. Ticket size might be small or large, but there's a lot of domestic M&A, be it wallet space, NBFC space, mutual fund broker. So there's a lot of intra-India early stage M&A that seems to be happening. The other thing they come to us a lot for, data, of course, is an evergreen topic. Pulling data from bureaus is a very fintech-ish topic. A lot of bank partnerships. Incidentally, it's purely, I mean, off late also because of RBI, a lot of, structuring issues, the whole FATF problem, not having investments from FATF countries into payment system operators, NBFCs, has just completely created a huge problem for a lot of these entities. So net, it's, I mean, if you asked me 3-4 years ago, rarely I would actually have a client who would be from early stage. But also the other thing, Tejal, is what's been happening is this is more a personal experience. The ecosystem of GCs, which is in the early stage, is a lot more informed today, compared to probably 5-6 years ago. And I think Tushar can, back me up on this. So, there was this whole thing about GC and private practice, but a lot of the GCs are, I won't call them young in terms of early 20s, but they are a lot more mature. They understand the ecosystem and they identify risk a lot better, as opposed to rubber stamping. So they're able to pick the issue which requires outside counsel attention a lot more. So a lot of these, I mean, I won't say it's labor employment or, real estate, which gets flagged to us, but whenever it's strategic, especially if it is M&A side or something where they realize they need to take a tricky call, right? It's we're getting a lot more inbound compared to 3-4 years ago.
Great. Tushar, sorry, we lost you for a moment, so I can come back to you so you can finish your thought.
Sure, I hope it holds up. No, and just to take to Anu's point, like I think the reason we reach out to outside counsel is that we do understand it, but sometimes we feel it's really important. It's an extremely critical issue, and a second opinion would be really good, or to understand that, or get that confidence that is it that we are sort of being overly cautious or overly optimistic, right? And I think outside counsel sort of helps us keep in check on that. So, and I always say this, that I think you have to ask the right question to get the right answer, right? So I think the more specific you are, the better it would be. And that's what requires a really nuanced understanding. Otherwise, you'll never ask the right question. And I think the other thing I was saying before I cut out was just the gestation period in India, right? So I think the unknowns are so much, or the fact that it can keep changing in the RBI context, for example, just results in that everyone's at that same page where we don't know what's going to happen. So we just make good with whatever information we have, and then we quickly adapt when it changes. So I think that's a challenge for sure. And that does concern American companies.
So Neera, there's a couple of interesting ones with Geetika and Anu and Tushar, right? She says, the regulator is learning with us. Okay. Anu says, that we're not quite sure. RBI is giving him all the work right now, given how they've progressed. Give me your sense of how fast is law or policy changing? And what's your sense around policy changes in this area?
Yeah, Tejal, I feel the one is policy changes and other one is the interpretation issue. So whenever you go to a regulator, there is a big issue of the interpretation. You in-house, internally, you interpret the thing certain way. Your lawyers interpret the thing certain way. And then when you go to the regulator, that could be any regulator, SEBI or RBI or DOT or anybody or TRI, they have altogether a different interpretation. So that is the key issue today for any startup in India, not even the startup, even the existing businesses. So even if you go with some case precedents, that these are the case precedences, I will tell you like you have done this. And sometimes what happens, that is, I have experienced that they go after those cases and those cases are opened up. So now the situation is this, you can't even give the precedence. So I feel like there is a lot. I know that they give a consultation paper, they invite all the comments and everything. But when we are formulating the policies, so I think we need to be very clear. We should instead of having a complicated policy, it should be very clear, very specific. And what they want to say, it should be like in clearly black and without a very less exceptions, I can say. Like you might take 2 months or 3 months drafting it Or maybe you can show to the businesses, like once everything is ready, you can just give a maybe a trial period to the business houses who are affected by those policies, and come up with some ideas before implementing that. I would say that should be the pre-implementing period also. So now what is happening is there are a lot of policy changes are happening overnight, and then the implementation is also a big issue here. So instead of using the, I will say, the complicated wordings or something like that, so let it be a very simple, clear English with less of exceptions. So that will make everybody's life easy. That will be easy for the businesses to run their businesses. And then at the same time, like there are a lot of issues which we have recently in the past, we have seen that there are frequent amendments, and that they affect with the retrospective effect, that also hurt a lot of startups and a lot of investors sentiments also. And then there is a litigation, then they keep going on. And I think we can have a good governance on the policies. And I know, like even the society of this law firms are working on the simple English used by the lawyers, and Mr. Sagar is working on that, and I have attended his few sessions. I think that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Like then any startup, any founder who wanted to invest in India comes to India, he will read a policy, and if it is in plain English and knows what is possible and what is not possible, that will be, I think that is the one step towards the ease of doing business in India. So that is my perspective on this whole policy thing.
No, and you're very right. But one thing which I found, though, is very interesting is that the government is open to a lot of conversation. And one of the things, like you said, their interpretation being different, I think sometimes it's very difficult for startups or for any company to understand what is going on in their head. What are their drivers? And there are certain drivers behind sort of every legislation, and sort of understanding where they're coming from, why certain things are being put in place, and then really going to legislate for the rule and not for the exception. Because the diversity in the startup world is so much that you can't really legislate for everyone. So I think legislating for the rule rather than the exception would really go a long way. But tell me, the government does have many initiatives to promote startups, right? So they have Seed India, and they've got a Mudra Bank, and they're doing taxation benefits, etc., because they really want to incubate startups. Anu, what do you think needs to be done more? What other legal and regulatory changes would you like to see quickly to promote this entire ecosystem?
Sure, Tejal. And just to borrow Neera's point, because she raised a very, very important point, which, as an advisor to global companies, personally, it's been embarrassing. Because when you work with global law firms, the world they have is black and white. And when they ask us questions, we always carry it in shades of gray, rainbow colors in terms of risk. See, the whole issue is that I recall, a former Supreme Court Chief Justice saying that the only law which is absolutely objective in India is the Indian Penal Code of 1860, which actually Macaulay's legislation, which 1860 IPC, which is very clear. You read, you know what you shouldn't do. The problem is, lawmakers and, I'll give you an example. The whole China data protection law which came out, right? If you've read reviews about it, you can drive a truck through it. Forget India, I'm talking about China in this case. So the challenge is when lawmakers, and here I'm just trying to wear the hat of the regulator, because industry always wants objectivity, right? But most Asian countries, and it's probably a very East versus West maybe issue. Maybe that's one reason. We like to preserve the ability of keeping something in the back pocket. And you look at the whole China Press Note 3 issue, land border, April of last year, what came out. You look at, there are so many such examples, right? So to ever expect that all our laws are broad-based, you pick any law that has been framed in the independent India, and it's not a reflection on, colonial versus Indian. The thing is, because, and especially more so in startup world, tech world, where nobody, I mean, data localization, it's a classic example. If you look at the law, it is a 1 paragraph circular, but what it covers, nobody knows, right? So probably, one thing at least I have given up whenever I've dealt with the industry is clarity on laws. Not a good thing to say, but going with intent, which as a lawyer you should never say, but trying to understand the intent of the regulator or the lawmaker, I've realized is far more important. But to come back to the exact question, what should happen? See, probably there is one thing is there is suspicion. So if you look at tax department, if you look at money laundering, for example, a lot of exceptional situations have given bad name to everybody, right? Like I'll give you an example: the whole digital lending, which is a fabulous space which is evolving in India. The whole China lending problem which happened last year, correct? Basis which the RBI committee was set up. Rotten apple problem is something which has plagued the industry overall. So I think one thing that can happen is, and again, I don't know if I'm the policymaker, how I'll deal with this, because I don't know where money laundering is happening, where it is not happening. The whole angel tax, if you recall, there is a logic to angel tax issue because a lot of money was going out and coming back in undervalue. There was a very, very sound logic to angel tax if you're a policymaker. But of course, it was to catch 1%, 99% also got caught into it. Very honestly, Tejal, I don't know what the solution is. And I hate to say this because it's a very tricky one. Simply because, see, just imagine if you are a government employee, right? And if something goes through the net, not only you lose your job, you will get suspended. If it is like, that Sahara or Peerless or, those crazy situations, there'll be questions in the parliament. So what is the motivation for me to operate or look at a sector in good faith? You get the point I'm trying to make. So it's a very tricky one. Probably, I've seen the best folks who work, and Tushar can again, tell me if I'm right. In India, if you do business, you have to, you cannot have a right wrong. Some of the best clients I've worked with, especially the global tech companies, I have never told them do this, don't do this. There is risk with everything you do. We actually answer everything with high risk, medium risk, low risk. Risk is there. So, then they take a call on where the risk is, and accordingly, they take a business call. So, it's very different.
But then I think, Tushar, from your standpoint,
Yeah.
international perspective would be there should be no regulation at all. Let market regulate what needs to be regulated.
Well, I mean, maybe in a different world, but I think the perspective always is that have regulation, and I can't say it enough, and Anu just said it, but have clear regulation, right? Because I think again and again, there's all this you read about the Indian government's doing a lot, which it is, and you have all these wonderful initiatives, and therefore they're trying to make it easier for you to do business. But on the same side, on the other side, you have all these laws which are not clear, which leave many open questions and which sort of pull you down, right? And to Neera's earlier point on consultation, right? I think it's such a mixed bag. Like I've sat through multiple consultations as you also wear a policy hat and you partner with the policy team. Like there are some consultations you sit in where they actually open the door for you and say, okay, why don't you tell us what it should read as? And then maybe, then that window's there to draft it and say, this is what it should look like. And then there are some consultations where they hear you out. They say, we get it. These are issues. We will address them. And then when you actually have a follow-up discussion or document, the same issues are still there, right? And then you don't know how to further that conversation because you're like, I thought we had this discussion and I thought we agreed on certain things, but it doesn't always translate, right? And that's a problem, right? So I think clearer laws, better drafting, involving people who are experts in that. I know it's happening, but it needs to happen more so that the unknowns just reduce, right? Because then it really becomes very, very difficult. Like Anu's saying, we'll always quantify risk and take a decision, but even it's hard for even very evolved companies like Google to take decisions sometimes when the unknowns are so big or when the law is so opaque, right? So I think that really needs to change. And I think the other thing which the government is doing and should do more is just changing reducing the compliance burden, right? Like I think the labor laws coming together and them announcing labor law codes wherever we are on that and how much time it's going to take. But I think that will help, right? Instead of having a multitude of labor laws and you're trying to understand all of them, right? And similarly, I can take a tourism specific example, and then you sort of have a framework across the country instead of having state specific legislations on, for example, short-term rentals, right? So I think reducing the compliance burden, clarifying the laws and making them less opaque, I think these are some of the things which need to happen.
Neera, you were saying?
And just to add a little point here, what Tushar is saying is very, very fair. This is basically your if you don't behave laws, right? It is not that, behave A, B, C, D. There's a last if you don't behave. But this is a global issue. What is CFIUS in US? The whole ability to blanketly not approve a deal, right? What is that? Even in India, we don't have it by the way. There is no comparable to a CFIUS if you see a Broadcom, Qualcomm deal not going through. Or, there are so many such examples, correct? The whole world has legislations which mean not objectivity, but if I don't like you, if you don't behave, I won't say it's inside or outside or a nationalistic issue. But of course, the whole world is becoming good, right? Where you want to protect the domestic, where you want to have a clause where you want to talk about publisher liability versus platform liability.
Right. I'm going to just skip in the interest of time to the last question, and we'll do a wrap on that, which is, everyone talks about the ease of doing business. Let's talk about the ease of closing business. Really, there is a study which has said that 90% of Indian startups fail within the first 5 years of inception. So, tell me, is the environment really conducive to making mistakes, failing? And what would you all like to see in terms of the ease of closing business? Neera, would you want to take that?
Yeah, it is, Tejal, it is not always the failure of business. Sometimes some startups come with a definitive business structure, but that business structure does not fall within the ambit of all statutory issues and whatever is there in India. And then they are stuck. Then they are stuck that what to do, and then they want to close it down. They have certain amount of money which is fixed in India. They have invested in India, which they want to take out. It will take, like, if it took them 1 year to set up their business house here and doing all setting up and whatever, but not really started the businesses, but their money is stuck in India, it will take them, I don't know how many years to take out that money and to close that particular entity without doing anything in India. So that is a pain point for any investor. Like, I have attended few conferences in Europe and in USA and all that. People have this thought behind it. Okay, India, we can't avoid that market. We have to be there. But if we are stuck, we don't know. If we take the money there, we will never able to get that back to our own country. So that is the point there, and I think that is the fair point they have. There are so many overlapping compliances and regulations, as Geetika has said. It is very difficult. Then endpoint, what no government official will, not government department will be able to help you there, and they will say, okay, go to the court and take the order. And the courts, how they work, it is such a pain point. Then they just go round and round and round, and then what they will do, they will appoint one representative here and they just go and they say, okay, it is over the period, then they will just write off their investment, whatever they have done in India. That is a very sad part. I think along with the ease of doing business, there should be some exit window for the startups who are coming first time in India or the second time in India, that okay, within this much time, if you don't able to, there is a one special window available to you. As long as you don't have the creditors, you don't need to pay the money to the other people, it is fine, then you can exit like this. There should be a one window there, which is need of our, I believe. Is very important.
No, that is, and that's why I think, in the interest of time, I'll wrap, because I've sort of been told the next panel is already on. But You're absolutely right, Neera, and everyone here. You know, with the ease of doing business, we should have the ease of closing business, because you should be allowed to fail and fail early. Otherwise, you're not going to give these bright young entrepreneurs a chance to really grow and make something of what they have. And so I'll just wrap with, you know, my kind of favorite little piece on it, which is startups are a mindset more than a scale or a size. So, you know, we see a lot of large companies now who also say, let's start thinking like a startup. So very interesting times coming up. And with that, I'd really like to thank the panelists for a very interesting aspect, and looking forward to more lawyers joining startups. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Shikha.
Thank you. Thanks, Tejal. Thank you.
Thank you, Tejal. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Tejal. Thank you to the Power Panel for focusing comprehensively on the evolving legal landscape for the startups. Thanks a lot for your time, of course.